Johnny Talk Sports here with the Week 8 college football predictions. And what a Week 7 we had. We had another top 10 team fall at the hands of a non-top 10 opponent for the fourth consecutive week. And not only was this a top 10 opponent, but a top 5 opponent. Number 5 North Carolina upset by Florida State. North Carolina, their season is not over, as I believe that if they were to win out, they would have a case and a legitimate argument as to why they should be one of the 4 teams in the college football playoff. Because they still have to play Miami, Notre Dame, and potentially Clemson in the ACC championship. And I think if they were to win out, which includes wins over those 3 teams, they should get in. But if North Carolina plays the way they played against Florida State, they are definitely going to get blown out by Notre Dame and Miami. And even Clemson. I mean, Clemson won't be close. That would probably be like 56-14. Just absolutely brutal for North Carolina all night long. They had a hard time stopping Jordan Travis on the ground. And that final drive for North Carolina, they had a chance to take the lead in that game late after being down by 24 for most of the game. 3 drop passes in a row. And they seemed to get it in a position where they could potentially tie the game or even take the lead. But those drop passes, very costly. Now, we also had Alabama dominate Georgia. Although Georgia did lead at halftime, Alabama just came out and dominated, outscoring Georgia 21-0 in the second half. Alabama, to me, is the number 1 team in college football right now because they have wins over Georgia and Texas A&M, 2 top 7 teams. While Clemson, they've pretty much blown out whoever they've played within their conference. I think that Clemson is going to ultimately get a huge test from Notre Dame in a few weeks. I think Notre Dame can really give Clemson a run for their money, but we'll see what happens when we get to that week. It appears right now, which it feels like for maybe the 5th year in a row, where we see Clemson and Alabama, the 2 ultimate superior teams in college football. I mean, you can argue and say that maybe Ohio State could be in that conversation of superior teams. But Ohio State hasn't played a down of college football yet this season. Maybe once we see Ohio State in action in a couple of their games, maybe we'll consider Ohio State being one of those superior teams in the conversation. Oklahoma's really normally a superior team within the Big 12 conference, but this season, not so much. It appears that at the rate we're going to see Clemson and Alabama in the national championship. And even if Ohio State were to dominate everybody they play this year, I just can't see them beating Clemson or Alabama. I think if they were to play right now, Clemson would beat Ohio State by at least 14-17. And I think Alabama would win by at least 21 points. But anyway, to my Week 8 predictions. Now last week I had D-Dog on, and 2 of the games we predicted got postponed due to 2020 circumstances. LSU in Florida and Cincinnati and Tulsa. So let's hope that there are no postponements this week, as we can at least have a somewhat normal week of college football. And college football has some high hopes. The Big Ten is starting up their season this week. We're a couple of weeks away from the start of the Pac-12 season and all the other conferences. So let's get right to it, the Week 8 predictions. Now our first matchup of the week is a Friday night matchup between Louisiana and UAB. Louisiana suffered their first loss of the season last week to Coastal Carolina, 30-27, in a hard-fought game. Louisiana, after beating Iowa State earlier in the season, despite losing a game, I think Louisiana looks a lot better now, even though they've cut it close in a couple of their wins. While UAB, they're 4-1. Their only loss is to Miami, and they hung in there with Miami for quite a bit of time in that game. Both these teams have a great ground attack. Louisiana is ranked 28th in the FBS in rushing offense, with two great senior backs in Elijah Mitchell and Trey Ragas. For UAB, Spencer Brown has rushed for 472 yards this season so far, which is 10th in the FBS. But I think the difference in this matchup, I think if UAB's defense can stop this Louisiana offense and force the quarterback to throw the football, forcing Levi Lewis to win the game with his arm, I think UAB has got this game, because UAB is 5th in the FBS in passing defense. And the way I see this game, I think UAB is going to get the win here. I think that the running attack for Louisiana is going to get stopped by the UAB defense. And it's going to force Levi Lewis to win the ball with his arm, and he can't win it with his legs. So I'm going to pick UAB to win this matchup to move to 5-1 on the season and ultimately get into the top 25. Because it's great when all of these group of 5 teams are ranked in the top 25. I think it's good for college football. Next, we have Nebraska and number 5 Ohio State. And the Big Ten season opener for both these teams. Ohio State really hungry this year after the heartbreaking loss to Clemson in the semifinal in last year's college football playoff, in a game where many, including myself, felt like Ohio State should have won that game. Ohio State returns quarterback Justin Fields, who was super efficient last season in college football, who only threw 3 interceptions last season, and 2 of them were in that semifinal matchup. So only 1 interception in the regular season for Justin Fields. While Nebraska, they are looking to get back to relevance. 3rd year for head coach Scott Frost. And it was announced today that Adrian Martinez will be the starting quarterback for the Huskers this Saturday. Although, based off of Scott Frost's words of saying how he feels like Nebraska has 2 first-string quarterbacks, I anticipate Luke McCaffrey being in this game at quarterback at some point in this game, especially if Ohio State were to jump out to a 17-0 lead, and if Adrian Martinez is struggling early, if they put Luke McCaffrey in to try to find a spark within their offense. Now, the key for Nebraska in this game is, I think if you get this game within 14 points at the start of the 4th quarter, I think you've got a fighting chance in this one. Despite Ohio State being able to score at will last season, I think Nebraska have a chance to get within 14. I think they just can't let the game get away from them. And I think especially with no fans in attendance for Big Ten conference games this year, I think that could be another element that could work in Nebraska's favor. Because if you look at the last time they played Ohio State in the Horseshoe, almost won the game. I believe if 1 or 2 things go differently in that game, Nebraska most likely pulls off that upset against Ohio State. And Nebraska, they do look promising. Although I'm still having concerns about the defense for Nebraska, as they gave up a lot of rushing yards last season. They've given up a lot of rushing yards in the Scott Frost era. And Ohio State, they may not have J.K. Dobbins anymore. But I think Master Teague is going to have a really good season for the Buckeyes. I think he's going to start off having a good season for them this week. I like Master Teague to rush for about 155 yards at the minimum, while Ohio State wins this game pretty convincingly. Although the line for this game is, I believe, is at 26 or 27 points. But I think Nebraska can keep that close for the most part. But I just think Ohio State is going to dominate in the second half, because Ohio State is usually a second half team. So I'm going to pick the Buckeyes in this matchup. Next, we have Alabama and Tennessee. And for this one, I don't think this is going to be close at all, especially based on how Tennessee has played in the last 2 weeks. I would say for the last few minutes, Kentucky only scoring 7 points and giving up so much to Kentucky, getting blown out by the Kentucky Wildcats. And the second half against Georgia. Well, Tennessee's defense really stepped up to the occasion in the first half against Georgia. Ever since that, they are just getting completely outmanned with their defense. And Alabama, they're going to pounce. Jarrett Garantano has struggled in these last couple of games. And Alabama's going to feast on that. They're going to feast on turnovers. Alabama's just going to dominate. They're going to be too fast for Tennessee's secondary. Mac Jones is going to have a dominant performance. Najee Harris is going to dominate on the ground. I think Alabama wins this game. I'm going to say 56-7. I think it's going to be not even close for the most part. I'll be surprised if Tennessee scores more than one touchdown in this game. Next, we have number 23, NC State, and number 14, North Carolina. North Carolina looking to bounce back from their first loss of the season to Florida State in a game where they were significantly favored, while NC State, they are in the top 25. And this is going to be a huge test for North Carolina State to see how good of a team they are. Are they worthy of being in the top 25? Now, this game, I think, could be surprisingly close. But for North Carolina to win this game, they've got to work on not dropping passes. Drop passes is what cost North Carolina last week, and they can't let that happen again this week. Plus, North Carolina's got a great rushing attack. I think North Carolina is going to bounce back this week. I like the Tar Heels to win this matchup, although I do like NC State to keep this one close, because NC State has a history of keeping games against top-tier opponents very close. And I think if NC State does keep this close, if they keep it within a touchdown at the start of the fourth quarter, I like NC State's chances. But I just can't see that. I think North Carolina is motivated after losing last week. Knowing they still have some college football playoff hopes, I think they're going to bounce back in this one. I like Sam Howell and the offense to bounce back. I think the receivers are going to work on their drop passes. They're going to look at the film, see what went wrong, come back and win this game. I'm going to take the Tar Heels to recover from last week's loss. Another big matchup, a great matchup in the Big 12. Number 17, Iowa State, and number 6, Oklahoma State. For Oklahoma State, it's uncertain whether or not Spencer Sanders is going to return to the lineup, or if they're going to keep going with Oklahoma State quarterback Shane Illingsworth, who was at the beginning of the season the third quarterback on the depth chart. But he came in against Tulsa when backup quarterback wasn't doing so well. But then Illingsworth was a difference maker in that matchup against Tulsa. Only a 16-7 victory. But Iowa State, ever since their loss to Louisiana in their season opener, Iowa State has just looked so much better. That includes an upset against Oklahoma. And I think this is going to be a surprising matchup. I think it's going to be very close from start to finish. The Big 12 is really known for high-scoring games. I think this is going to be no exception. I think for Iowa State to win this game, they have got to utilize their running back, Breece Hall, who is in the top 10 in rushing in college football so far this season. Oklahoma State, they've got to get Chuba Hubbard going. Chuba Hubbard came back for this season to try to get Oklahoma State to the next level. Try to get them a Big 12 championship. So far, I would say Chuba Hubbard has underperformed a little bit, not really meeting up to the complete expectations. But I think Oklahoma State just has too many weapons on offense. Tylan Wallace, Dylan Stoner, Chuba Hubbard, even Spencer Sanders, if he were to come back this week. But if he were to win this one, Spencer Sanders would have to win the game with his legs in this one. He'd have to use them. He'd have to be mobile. But I think the Cowboys will win this game and keep the Big 12's college football playoff hopes alive. As the Big 12, it seems to be a conference where everybody's beating each other. I feel like Oklahoma State and Iowa State, these two teams, I honestly think these are the conference's last chance of getting the college football playoff. Next, we have Cincinnati, who is number 9 in the country, going up against number 16 SMU. Now, SMU, they have had some injuries within the wide receiver position, season-ending injuries. and it's a shame. But it's next man up for SMU, as Rashee Rice and Danny Gray stepped up last week in the receiving game for SMU, both having over 130 yards and a touchdown last week in the overtime victory against Tulane, while Cincinnati, their game with Tulsa last week, got postponed. So they've had some more time to prepare for this matchup. The way I see this game, if Cincinnati were to utilize their running game, keep SMU's offense off the field, keep their defense on the field, it's going to exhaust them out the later on the game goes. But the difference I think this matchup is going to entail is the SMU offense. Quarterback Shane Buechele is second in the nation in passing yards, only behind UCF quarterback Dylan Gabriel, who had an unbelievable 601 passing yards last week in the loss to Memphis. But I'm going to pick the upset here. I think for the 5th consecutive week, we're going to see a top 10 team go down to a non-top 10 opponent. I think SMU is going to pick up the upset. I think their offense is going to score at will against Cincinnati's defense. Shane Buechele is going to have at least 400 yards in this matchup, as I think SMU pulls off the upset. And what I think is the game of the week, this is where game day is going, number 18 Michigan and number 21 Minnesota. Now, Minnesota had an unbelievable season last year. They got into the top 4 at some point in the season. They really exceeded expectations last year. And although they did get some reality checks, they lost to Iowa and Wisconsin. Both times, difficult time stopping the run. Well, for Michigan, they seem to do well. They seem to dominate opponents until they have to face off against Penn State or Ohio State. The way I see this game, Tanner Morgan, he's going to target Rashad Bateman a lot. He's going to have to. Rashad Bateman originally opted out of the season, but then he decided to opt back into the season. Complete mismatch for anybody. And for the Wolverines, with Minnesota struggling stopping the run last year in their losses, you've got to utilize running back Zach Charbonnet. Now, it's uncertain who Michigan's quarterback is going to be, as Dylan McCaffrey opted out of the season. But I think Michigan is going to utilize their running game with Zach Charbonnet. I think he's going to have a big game against this Minnesota defense. And I think it's going to possibly show that Minnesota was just a one-season wonder. And I am going to pick Michigan to win this game. I'm going to say probably by about a touchdown. I think Minnesota could keep this one close, especially if Bateman, if he is going to have the game that I think he's going to have, because he's a complete mismatch for anybody on the Michigan defense. I'm going to pick Michigan to win by 7 points. I'm going to say 31-24. So those are my predictions for Week 8 of the college football season. Like, share, and subscribe, and I will talk to you next time.